In the winter of 2014, in the small town of Brattleboro, Vermont, a 92-year-old man named Ronald Reed passed away. He had spent his whole working life as a gas station attendant, and after that he took a job as a janitor at a department store, a position he held for almost 20 more years. He wore the same worn flannel shirts for years, drove a second-hand Toyota, and in his spare time gathered fallen branches in the woods so he wouldn't have to pay for firewood. His neighbors thought of him as simply modest, maybe a bit odd, a quiet loner. When his will was opened after his death, the whole town froze. This man had left behind $8 million, almost all of it going to the local library and hospital. Reed had no background in finance, no high salary, no lucky break like a lottery win.
For decades, he had simply put aside most of his modest income into the stock of solid companies and never sold. At around the same time, not far away, a very different story was unfolding. Richard Fuscone had graduated from Harvard, earned an MBA from the University of Chicago, and built a brilliant career at one of the world's largest investment banks, rising to vice chairman of Merrill Lynch's Latin America division. In his 40s, he was already wealthy enough to retire and devote himself to philanthropy. He owned an 18,000 square foot mansion in Connecticut with 11 bathrooms, 2 elevators, 2 swimming pools, and monthly upkeep costs of more than $90,000. But most of it had been built on borrowed money and tied up in assets that couldn't be sold quickly.
When the 2008 financial crisis hit, everything collapsed almost at once. First, one house was foreclosed, then the second, and Fuscone himself ended up in bankruptcy court. Same market, same era, and 2 completely opposite endings. It's this very paradox that American financial writer and investment fund partner Morgan Housel opens his book The Psychology of Money with. And the conclusion he draws is an unusual one in a world that likes to admire diplomas and IQ scores. Doing well with money has very little to do with hard science and a great deal to do with behavior. A genius who loses control of his emotions can go broke, and a perfectly ordinary person with no financial education at all can become wealthy if they have a handful of simple habits that have nothing to do with intelligence.
Housel illustrates why through the story of 2 childhood friends, Bill Gates and his best friend, Kent Evans. In the fall of 1968, there were roughly 300 million teenagers on the planet. Of all of them, only about 300 attended a single school in Seattle called Lakeside, which happened to have the money and the foresight to buy a computer terminal, a rarity even at universities back then. Gates was one of them. He would later tell that school's graduating class, if there had been no Lakeside, there would have been no Microsoft. Right alongside him since 8th grade was his closest friend, Kent Evans, every bit as gifted, every bit as obsessed with computers, sharing the same dreams of one day running a company together. But Evans died in a mountaineering accident before he ever finished high school, an outcome statisticians put at roughly 1 chance in a million.
That same 1 in a million chance that handed Gates an extraordinary stroke of luck took everything from Evans. Housel insists, when we see someone's extraordinary success, we almost always underestimate the role luck played in it. And when we see someone's downfall, we underestimate the role of risk that simply didn't work out in their favor. That's why we shouldn't model ourselves after specific individuals with their unrepeatable circumstances, but after broad, general patterns of behavior instead. Next, Housel turns to something that can be even more dangerous than outright failure, the inability to ever say to yourself, enough. People who already have enormous wealth keep risking their reputation, their freedom, and their families for one more zero in their account, and end up losing things that can never be bought back. The story of the respected executive Rajat Gupta, who, while already sitting on the boards of some of the world's biggest corporations and already a very wealthy man, got caught insider trading for money he essentially didn't even need, is a sobering illustration of how the absence of a sense of enough can turn a rational person into his own worst enemy. The single most valuable financial skill, Housel writes, is knowing when to stop moving the goalpost you're chasing. A separate chapter is devoted to a force the human brain is systematically bad at grasping, compounding. Housel runs the numbers on Warren Buffett's fortune. At the time the book was published, his net worth was estimated at roughly $84.5 billion, and more than $81 billion of that had been earned after he turned 65. Buffett started investing at age 10 and never stopped for more than 7 decades. If he had retired at 60, like most people, and simply enjoyed life, chances are nobody would have ever heard of him. His real secret isn't extraordinary returns, it's the almost unthinkably long stretch of time those returns were allowed to compound, undisturbed. The human mind is well built to understand linear growth and almost incapable of intuitively grasping exponential growth, which is exactly why people so consistently underestimate what time can do to even a modest sum of money, provided it's simply left alone. Closely tied to this is an idea Housel considers one of the most important in the whole book. Getting wealthy and staying wealthy are two entirely different tasks that call for opposite qualities. You can get wealthy through a single bold decision, a lucky bet, optimism, and a willingness to take risks. But you can only stay wealthy through the opposite set of qualities: frugality, a healthy dose of paranoia, and a constant awareness that part of your past success was simply luck, which means it can turn just as easily as it arrived. The legendary early 20th century stock trader Jesse Livermore built enormous fortunes several times over through bold bets on market swings, and lost every last cent of them just as many times, because each time he played at the very edge, leaving himself no room for error. People who stay wealthy for a long time, Housel explains, fear ruin more than they crave the next windfall, and so they willingly accept a return a little below the maximum possible, just so they never end up back at zero.
Housel also shows where most wealth, and success in general, actually comes from. Not from steady, even progress, but from a very small number of rare tail events. An investment fund might make 50 bets, of which 45 turn out mediocre or lose money outright, while all of the fund's profit comes from 2 or 3 winners big enough to cover every other loss. The same is true for an individual. A handful of genuinely good decisions over a long enough stretch of time can more than make up for a great many small mistakes. That's exactly why you shouldn't demand flawlessness from yourself or your investments in every single instance. What matters is staying in the game long enough for that rare, decisive event to actually have a chance to happen. So what's the point of saving money at all?
Housel's answer is a surprising one. The highest dividend money pays isn't a yacht or a mansion. It's control over your own time. Waking up and deciding for yourself what to do with your day without having to ask anyone's permission is the real luxury that financial independence buys. And according to a great deal of research, it's far more closely tied to happiness than income alone. Here, Housel also unpacks what he calls the man-in-the-car paradox. When we see a gleaming sports car go by, we rarely think, what an impressive driver. We think, I'd love to be the one behind the wheel of that car. The driver, in buying it, was usually hoping for admiration and respect from the people around him. But in that very moment, those people aren't admiring him. They're admiring the car, mentally putting themselves in his seat instead.
Conspicuous wealth almost never buys the very respect it's meant to purchase. From this follows perhaps the central idea of the whole book. Real wealth is almost always invisible. What you can actually see, the expensive watch, the new car, the vacation on another continent, is money that has already been spent, which means, in effect, proof that there's now less wealth, not more. A truly wealthy person isn't someone who spends a lot to show it off, but someone who could spend it and chooses instead to hold it back in stocks, savings, free time, and future options. That is, in exactly the form that can't be seen from the outside.
That's precisely why Ronald Read, with his second-hand Toyota, was in fact wealthier than Richard Fuscone with his 18,000 square foot mansion. One man's wealth was hidden away in stocks nobody could see, while the others had been poured into walls and swimming pools for everyone to see. From this comes a practical conclusion Housel offers as he wraps up the discussion of saving. How much money a person ends up with depends far less on the size of their income than people tend to assume, and far more on their savings rate, that is, on the simple willingness to consistently set aside the gap between what you earn and what you spend. That willingness doesn't require a high salary or an impressive rate of return. It requires only one thing: modest wants that aren't tied to what the neighbors happen to be spending.
This is exactly why, Housel argues, personal finance is better guided not by what's formally rational on paper, a decision derived from flawless logic, but by what's reasonable, the choice a particular person can actually live with, calmly, for decades, without panicking at the market's first serious stumble. He himself, the author admits, prefers a more conservative saving strategy than strict calculations would call for, simply because sleeping soundly at night is worth more than a few extra percentage points of return. And because the future is always full of surprises no statistic drawn from the past can predict, every financial plan needs a margin of safety, the slack that's there in case reality turns out harsher than even the gloomiest scenario you built into your calculations. Let's return, though, to the two lives this all began with.
Housel is careful to point out, the point of Ronald Reed's and Richard Fuscone's stories isn't that you should try to copy the gas station attendant's path exactly and avoid the bankers. The point is something else, that between these two men lay a vast gulf in education, connections, and starting opportunities. And none of that is what decided the outcome. What decided it was ordinary human behavior. Patience against greed, modesty against showing off, a long horizon against wanting everything right now. You can find formulas and spreadsheets in any finance textbook, but the ability to quietly set aside a tenth of your earnings year after year, to stay calm when the market falls, and to stop trying to impress people whose opinion, in the end, doesn't matter at all. No textbook teaches that.
You can only learn it from yourself by making a rule of the one decision worth making again every single day, to set aside a little more today than you spend.